Okay. Comrades, you're all very welcome to this meeting of Workers' International Network. We're fortunate today, our speaker is Matthew Jones, and he's going to speak about a topic that's very, very relevant to stuff that's happening across the globe today. The topic for today's discussion is imperialism. And we can see, even in today's events, the effects that imperialism have had in bringing about the crises that we now face. For example, the India-Pakistan crisis which is developing is a direct consequence of the intervention of British imperialism in that region in the late 1940s. The crisis in the Middle East arises directly from the role of the imperial powers in that region of the world over a century and in more recent times after World War I. The crisis that's happening in Russia, Ukraine are the events in that region, and it's not confined to just these two countries. Again, is the direct result of the imperialist ambitions of the Russian leadership. So it's a very relevant topic, and it's also worth noting that over the years, all of the major European powers today were all imperialist powers in their own time. They plundered Africa. France, Germany, or less so, but France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, and many other countries of Europe also played a destructive role in the continent of Africa and also in the Far East. The Netherlands played a very negative role in Asia and in Africa. So the role of imperialism is a very relevant and a very current topic. And there's also new questions emerging as well on the questions that relate to imperialism, the role of Russia, of China, and emerging imperial powers. So it's a very interesting discussion which we're going to be dealing with here. And comrades are free to raise any questions or debate issues or clarify issues in their own, whatever they wish to do. They can intervene completely freely in the discussion. So the WIN discussions are not just lectures laying out a line. It's creating conditions where other comrades can contribute to the discussion and fill out our understanding, which is the purpose of these meetings. So we all come away with a better understanding of the issues than when we entered the meeting. So with that, I'll ask Matthew to introduce the discussion. And after, say, 20 minutes, Matthew, I'll just give you a reminder. So, away.
Okay. Thanks, comrades. I will share my screen. I hope if it works. I'm hoping it will. Come on. Where are we? Oh, there we are. Right, okay. Right, okay. So, all right, thanks, comrades. I mean, what I'm trying to do here, obviously in the time we've got available, is to look at the US system, the system as dominated by the US post 1945, and obviously the US as imperial hegemon. Obviously, as Comrade Finn has said, you know, there's a previous history of imperialism, particularly obviously British imperialism as the previous dominant power. We do live in a sort of a privileged time, as it were, because we can watch Trump take this system apart, and you know, and of course the decay of the system of that system itself. So in those terms, I mean, you can watch in some ways how it works or how it should work and how it's ceasing to work, which is always interesting and useful, and as well as obviously creating even greater crisis in the world. I think that the thing is, obviously what we've got then is the US hegemon as you know, the dominant power, more so than at any other time, more so than the British previously, but of course allowing, with a system that allows space for the subordinate imperial powers like the European countries, Western European countries like Japan, etc. Basically those countries, I mean, you broadly define imperialist countries that exact a tribute from the rest of the world. So you have that. There's also, of course, as I'm trying to go through, you know, in terms of development capitalism, the development towards monopoly and oligopoly, the degeneration of the law of value and that system, that the system has also moved from productive capital to the dominance of finance capital, completely so. And the dollar as the world currency, and then of course the questions that arise from that. The political control mechanisms in terms of control of politics. So the imperialists have essentially an allowed version of politics in most of the world that they have influence on or control. Fifthly, military and intelligence systems. In fact, operate a complete military set of military alliances, the biggest, world's largest military in history, the US military. The fact that the intelligence systems go with that as well, and the operation of these. Finally, of course, is cultural dominance. I mean, obviously, Gramsci speaks of the dominance of culture by the ruling class, which is quite clear, and the dominance of culture by the US, which is also another point and feature of the system. So I'm hoping this will now clock down. Oh, there you are. Okay. So what we have then is a system in which the US basically allows an operation of subordinate powers under conditions, in which the ruling classes themselves align effectively on a world scale, particularly against the working class. And we can see this obviously decided by the likes of the G7 or Davos, or indeed the US Federal Reserve, which effectively sets interest rates and leads on the questions of the class struggle. Study the sayings of Jerome Powell, who quite, as the chairman of the Fed, they're quite interesting. Alan Greenspan as well, in further back, very interesting character. In those terms, go back to the slide, and apologies for the collapse of my machine. Anyway, so in brief, what we're looking at really is a system that's been set. It was set up by the US, and you can see it, spanning across the world in terms of, as I say, the assorted bodies of the world's ruling classes, the likes of the UN, obviously institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, which we'll deal with in it shortly, which actually form a system of control across the world, run by the US. Which of course Trump is now taking apart, which makes it, as I say, very interesting. In terms of subordinate imperial powers, I mean, obviously they have their own interest, and there is, you can see conflict between them and the US, but the US always has the last say. They never question the US. I mean, you can take as an example, quite stark example recently was, of course, the US blowing up the Nord Stream pipelines in the Baltic, Europe's most important energy infrastructure, and a part half owned by Germany, and the Germans could not bring themselves to say a word, much less question the US, because they understand the system, and then that's not their role at all. So that's a really amazing demonstration. Obviously, you've also got this system of military alliance and so on, which the US sits at the top of. NATO is the biggest example, but there are others, of course, running across the Pacific and other places. What we're also, as I say, looking at is the disintegration of the whole system, which has been in place, has been taking place over decades, but has been drastically accelerated by Trump. There is then the question, okay, in terms of, are there, people have posited things like regional imperial powers, other forms of imperialism, Russia, so on. I mean, I would disagree, but that's a different argument, I think. How do you qualify powers like Turkey, etc.? So that is also a question. In terms of what we're seeing in capitalist production under these conditions, of course, is a move to monopoly and oligopoly. So you can see the domination of production by either straight out monopolies or oligopolies in most of the key areas. And I'll take certain examples here. What it does also is it means that price, actually, what it means, price is arbitrary, can then be decided by the producer effectively. And so it also goes alongside, obviously, with the, this is a decay of the law of value itself. We actually see an interesting thing. The other thing, of course, is that actually what you're seeing is that production itself is now, in many cases, confined to a handful of sites for key outputs, and in some cases, a single factory. I'm very interested how that works for the working class. I mean, remember here, recently, just up the road, there's a bearing factory here in Glasgow, and there was a dispute, something like, it was 25 years ago, in which they discovered that, of course, they make bespoke bearings to order, not the commodity variety. And they discovered that when they were provoked by management and occupied the plant, that in fact there is no world spare capacity, and therefore nobody else could do their job, which is quite an interesting thing. In more central questions, you can look at, say, the whole question of semiconductors, which are, of course, as we know, critical to all forms of machines now. That a single company, an outfit called ASML, actually produces all of the photolithography machines, which is a Dutch company. All the photolithography machines necessary for making high-end chips, produced by a single company. The Americans then told them not to sell them Chinese. So it'd be interesting to see if the Chinese can replicate ASML. The Taiwan semiconductor company actually controls the entire production of the best chips, and there is nobody else. So in those terms, you can see that, in those how that works in world scale. You also see, of course, that the US dominates tech companies. I mean, all the tech companies actually are, any size generally are American, and that they've dominated that aspect of the development of the world economy. You can look at Amazon, Alphabet, Google, Microsoft, and so on and so forth, and Nvidia, all these guys. They're also, of course, very keen on genocide. That's the question. The other interesting point of this, of course, is that China actually controls most of the production of green technologies. Interestingly enough, of course, all the kerfuffle about the production of rare earth metals. The only country which actually has the ability to refine rare earth metals now is China. Nobody else does it. Nobody else has the capacity to do it. And you can see that also in terms of the production of things like solar PV, which is totally dominated by China, or indeed batteries, the large-scale lithium batteries. The Europeans have been desperate to produce a battery company, and they can't do it. And it is actually dominated by China. In terms of the finance, obviously, in terms of finance capital, and what we're seeing in terms of looking at how finance capital itself works, what we're seeing is the US control of the financial system through, obviously, itself, and then through institutions like the World Bank, IMF, and so on, and the use of the World Bank and IMF to impose conditions across large sections of the world, as we know, in terms of oppression of the working class. And we can see this obviously in numerous countries, whether that's Sri Lanka or Argentina or wherever else, that the IMF basically is used by the imperialist powers in order to dictate to the global south, in particular, the treatment of its working class. So you then, in terms of the dollar, I mean, the important thing about the use of having the world's currency, the US, of course, has the dollar, which then essentially is the world's trading currency, which allows the US itself then to finance itself. And what it's done, actually, of course, is to issue debt and dollars at enormous volumes. I mean, there's enormous volumes of dollars floating around the world. And of course, it means that the US has basically written itself an open check to finance its own government debt, which is now rising to enormous levels. The problem for that, of course, is that is now the end of that can now be seen. That the ability of the US to do that can now be seen. What we've got also, of course, is the move to the system itself. Of course, moves to its current configuration with the end of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. 1971, actually, on the impact of the Vietnam War, the US and the other powers, of course, particularly the US, decide that they will remove the notion of convertibility of the dollar at $35 to the ounce of gold under conditions, and move to a complete fiat currency system, because obviously it allowed them to get out of that crisis. So we wind up with a situation that we have now, in which that actually progresses through a series of crashes, actually, to the 2008, 2007 and 8 crash, which is with the issues of which are unresolved, which means now essentially that all the banks effectively only exist because they have a state guarantee. Effectively, all the banks in the world actually, in real terms, have been nationalised in one form, in a form, i.e., they're underwritten by the state. It's interesting if you look at things like the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. It was quite clear that they understood, and other banks. I mean, actually, there were 3 banks that collapsed at that point. It was clear that they understood that they could not actually interfere in the operation of the system, because all the banks now are so interconnected. You can't interfere with them. If you do one, then you can collapse the whole lot. And so what they basically pumped in more money and basically tried to shut the door and say, right, you lot keep it running. So that, again, I mean, it's an amazing position to be in, that they now have a financial system on that level. As I say, the dollar is under question, and there's an enormous move to gold as the first resort, but also to other things. I mean, in terms of, the problem being, of course, is that the Americans, the US, under the when the US managed to incite the war in Ukraine, the first thing they did was to cut off Russia from the SWIFT payment system, which they control, in an effort to obviously to create issues. Secondly, of course, to expropriate or at least seize all the assets, particularly dollar assets. This of course raises the whole issue. Well, okay, we have a world denominated in dollars, and the people who issue the dollars are then saying, well, if you offend us, we will remove them from you, which of course then frightened much of the thinking part of the world. Well, okay, why would we want to hold a currency if we offend the Americans? We are going to wind up with them seizing our money. So in those terms, as I say, the end is in sight. Then move on to in terms of a political control mechanism, and this is also critical. As I say, I'm trying to do this in reasonable summary, and obviously you can go into any point of this in greater depth. The encouragement of financing and control of acceptable politicians, and you can see this everywhere. In fact, of course, that the imperialists have a set of politicians they consider acceptable, and you can watch it in Britain. You can watch this by those people who get trips to the US and get given this things like the leadership course in the US, and you can see if they've been on that, then obviously they're acceptable. And you can see obviously the amount of money that's pumped out into different countries, and the fact that of course the imperialists want to impose their people everywhere. The people who will work for them, and how the mechanism of control now is not the old colonial mechanism you occupy. Now the mechanism of control is to make sure you have the politicians that'll do what you want them to, and of course financial control. And the use of the IMF and so on and so forth to maintain the control. You can see that the alternative is unacceptable politicians, and you can see what happens to unacceptable politicians. Obviously, in our example here, the example of Corbyn, in which the Secretary of State of the US, Mike Pompeo at the time, actually said, well, the notion of Corbyn as Prime Minister in the UK is unacceptable. And this is the same. I mean, obviously, you can see what happens in the rest of the world in terms of coups and so on and so forth to unacceptable politicians. In terms of also, of course, you have then, of course, the behaviour of the intelligence agencies led by the CIA, NED, National Endowment for Democracy, and USAID, in terms of which are, of course, the funding mechanisms. So obviously you have the activities of the CIA across the world in terms of maintaining control, and also other intelligence agencies as well. Which of course then means that you've also got a huge mechanism for financing politics and civil society, non-governmental organisations, political organisations, campaigns, etc. This was illustrated recently, of course, by Trump depriving USAID, NED, etc., of all its money, which then created the collapse of large numbers of these groups. I mean, most notably, of course, in Georgia, where there was huge numbers of people organised in all these NGOs, and suddenly all their money vanished because obviously most of it was from America. Sort of reveal what kind of organisations they are. The final point, of course, is the control of trade unions, and you can look into the activities of the CIA and the other intelligence organizations in the control of trade unions. We've been written about in numerous books, and that actually, of course, you face constantly in the unions the effort to control the organization. You can see, I mean, to the extent where the American Union Federation is known to many as the AFL-CIA, because that was it. It remains its role in order to hand out money and influence across the globe, wherever. So that's a critical point as well. Right. Okay. So obviously, the other the sort of hard, crunchy bit is the military system. You've got a system. Obviously, the U.S. military is the largest military ever seen in world history. Millions. I think it's something like it's over 2 million. The Pentagon implies over 2 million, and some others it doesn't want to account for. Has over 800 world bases across the world. An enormous network and alliances. The top line is NATO, and it's been at war since 1945. I mean, if you look at the obviously the British as the chief dog's body of the US have been at war every single year since 1945. I think with the exception of 1968. The Americans have been at war every single year. Basically, it is a system of war. It's interesting, actually. Some comrades actually put this forward in the 60s, and I think they've got a good case. Actually, what you've got is a situation, certainly under the Cold War system, where they were spending a lot more money. It was a method of stabilizing economy. To the point where you could call military spending, which of course is a means, obviously, of sucking money out of the economy, as it were, or in some ways pumping in other ways, of course, removing production, removing output, certainly, from the economy, and therefore stabilizing it, producing a thing which you might call Department 3. The theory of permanent arms economy, which I think is interesting and worth exploring. In terms of intelligence systems, I mean, what you've seen actually, I mean, this is new, is in terms of the current system, is the fact the integration of all of the imperial powers intelligence systems, and including the likes of Israel. I mean, Israel's clearly integrated into the intelligence community, and of course there's mass collection, mass sharing of intelligence, of data, et cetera. And our friend Edward Snowden actually identified the fact that, of course, that the imperial powers, and particularly the British and Americans, were and are removing the entire content of the internet, essentially, so they can examine it. Is being sucked out, particularly actually by GCHQ. There are fewer restrictions on GCHQ in Britain than there are on the NSA in the US. So in those terms, there is a complete integration in those terms. As I say, Israel. If you look at the Israeli example at the moment, I mean, clearly what you have is integration of the military systems, and you can see, the complete cooperation between the Americans, and the American military is assisting in the planning of the genocide in Gaza, and it actually has personnel on the ground. Similarly, the UK, is deeply integrated into that whole system. At the same time, what the UK has done is to provide intelligence. There have been, as has been documented, over 600 flights from Akrotiri in Cyprus by what's called the R1 data collection aircraft, which effectively spend all their time going around, two of them going around Gaza, basically all the time, sucking up data and providing that to the Israelis. So in those terms, the UK government is, central to the conduct of the genocide. It's not merely complicit; it's carrying it out. But it's all part of that system, and the system is one of control of the Middle East, which is important. I'd say that the final point on this, of course, is that the US's actual record in fighting wars is pretty terrible, along with the British, of course. I mean, you would have thought, the British had already been kicked out of Afghanistan twice in the 19th century, that they had the sense not to go there again, but they did, and they got kicked out again. And you can see in the most recent example in which essentially the Yemenis have defeated the US Navy. quite extraordinary. As I say, and again, you can go into that in greater detail and discussion. People want to do that. I think the final point I want to make is in terms of cultural domination. Obviously Gramsci makes this point in terms of the ruling class dominated culture. And you can see again, I mean, that the media, of course, is actually sort of is limited and now clearly limited and controlled and operated as a propaganda weapon. And it's quite clear, now in terms of what's happening in the genocide in Gaza, the media operates in that way. It's controlled, and of course that all of that kind, is led from the US. Again, the same. So same for the tech companies. Actually, if you look at the tech companies are one deeply interested in the genocide and how they can learn from it, and then of course carrying out in terms of provision of artificial intelligence. But it's also how do they limit, who watches what happens on the net, and that's certainly been the case. It's been tracked in terms of the things like search algorithms and all this sort of stuff, and audiences, and there's a definite political effort to control that. Again, as also film. I mean, film, of course, has been a largely a US dominated medium. Obviously, with things like the Bollywood and so on and so forth. But it is quite a major US. I think the final one is popular music. The interesting about popular music, of course, is that the dominant form is derived, of course, from black music. Of course, the most oppressed layers of the working class in the US, but there's then being used as a mechanism in the rest of the world. A very interesting film done recently on the use of jazz in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is extraordinary. The use of this medium, which is of course grows up out of a struggle by black musicians in order to try and dominate a country in Africa. Which I mean, it's a very good film. I think the final point I would make, before opening for discussion, is that they also have to bear in mind, of course, that the capitalism and the imperialist system is racist, fundamentally racist to its core. I mean, you could posit a non-racist capitalism, but it doesn't exist. It is racist, but it's then to understand that racism is driven by the class position of the ruling class, and is not the version put forward by identity politics and so on, which again has been used effectively, essentially by the Democrat Party in the US. So as an introduction, I'll throw it out to you. Thanks, and apologies for the interruption.
Yeah, thank you very much, Matthew. That was an extremely informative opening contribution containing lots of new insights and different angles of approach to the issue of imperialism, which will assist enormously in widening comrades' understanding of what imperialism is. And as you've explained, it's all encompassing. It's not just about military intervention, nor is it just about financial intervention, nor is it just about military alliances. So a very, very good opening contribution to that. So thank you for that. There's lots of new ideas which comrades will have considered during the course of the opening contribution, which they may wish to contribute to, ask questions, develop, disagree, or whatever. So it promises to be a very informative discussion. So it's open to anybody now who wishes to speak. So if you indicate either using the electronic hand, which is the easiest to follow, or if you're happy if you're waving your arms around, I mean, that's okay. But if you want to speak now, could you indicate, and we'll get some idea about the order of speakers. There's lots to talk about, lots to develop, lots to question. So I'm sure the delay just means cameras are getting their thoughts together. Does anybody want to open the discussion? Yeah, there we go. It's John, is it? John Byrne.
There you go. It's just a few thoughts on the recent events around the Gulf and Donald Trump's visit there. I think what Matthew's saying in many ways is true, but I'd take it from a slightly different angle. And that is that it's almost a total decay. It's a bit like the latter days of the Roman Empire, at least that bit that was in Western Europe, where the Roman Empire basically imploded. The situation's one where, if you like, in the Middle East, you have a raging genocide going on in Gaza. And the way I look at the genocide in Gaza is the amount of deaths each day. I watch Al Jazeera in the morning and they give a total that's come up. And since, well, for the last week and a half or so, since Israel has, if you like, ramped up its attacks on Gaza, there's been over 100 deaths a day, sometimes as high as 120. Now, these deaths are, if you like, the product of shelling by the artillery, the military artillery of Israel, and the bombing by its air force. These deaths do not include the people who've been badly injured previously and are dying, does not include those people who are dying from starvation and disease, and yet those under the rubble are dying. The situation is one that the leaders of the Arab world, or the financial leaders of the Arab world in the Gulf, did nothing. They applauded briefly when Trump mentioned Gaza, thinking he was going to say something about a ceasefire, but he said nothing, just that all hell would be let loose. If, you know, he equated the Hamas with all the worst atrocities one could think, whereas in reality, it's Netanyahu and his cabinet. And it just struck me that on the one hand, you had all these billionaires getting together in the Gulf, applauding Trump, and Trump coming out with all his, the way he speaks. He doesn't speak in English. He speaks in some sort of, I don't know what it is, yuppie phrase language. And I was listening to the correspondent from Sky News, and he was going on about what a great week Trump had in the Gulf. And he ended up almost in despair. And he said, when one looks at Gaza and when one looks at the atrocities taking place in Gaza, one's in almost disbelief that these people, fellow Arabs, can carry on the way they have been carrying on. And it was almost a feeling that this is, if you like, not quite the death throes of capital, because that was not what he was reporting. He was reporting a new injection of growth of capital, but a feeling that the people who are participating were not human beings, because they had no regard for human life, but just a set of, I don't know what, you could call them people who put profit before everything, before their own, not just human beings, but their own people. And, allowing Israel to bomb Syria, to bomb Lebanon, to bomb Gaza, to bomb the West Bank. And Israel's made it quite plain what it wants. It wants a totally Jewish state in Israel, in Greater Israel, because they'll be loath to give up the Golan Heights. They'll be loath to give up the southern Lebanon. And contrary to Trump's boasts that he'd come to a deal with the Yemenis, the Israelis bombed Yemen. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I think it chimes in to a degree with what Matthew said about imperialism being, I wouldn't say on its last legs, but showing all the signs of a decayed, rotten system that is ripe for collapse. Now, obviously, what is lacking, and he referred to it in terms of the what's AFCIO in America. You know, the fact that the working class is totally unprepared at the moment, and if you like, our job is to look as best we can because we've very limited resources. But I think, as Lenin said, that the world socialists fitted into a carriage in Switzerland in whenever it was 1916. Well, we at times I feel that we're like that we'd all fit into a rather large car, or definitely into a bus. Although I think we have far more supporters than that. But the feeling is one that, if you like, there's this mad dance going on with Trump, you know, being able to tell the whole world what it can and what it can't do. And the reality is the whole world is looking on, apart from the very tops of the political and military system, looking on and feeling, well, this joker is going to get a comeuppance. And that's the way I feel, that Trump has been given an absolute clear run. And as one correspondent, when I was watching one of the news programs today, said that Joe Biden was so inept that the worst president in American history has been re-elected, i.e. Trump was there from 16 to 20, Joe Biden got in, and Joe Biden's track record was so inept that alone a reduced turnout, Trump was re-elected as president. I'll leave it at that, comrades. I know it's totally all over the place, but I just feel myself that, if you like, what capitalism has to offer, particularly with regard to, if you like, the Arab leaders in the Gulf and Trump in America, has nothing for the working class, but, you know, sort of, well, I wouldn't say despair, but definitely no bright future. And it's up to the working class to get together and to try and sort things out in their favour, not in the favour of the billionaires that we now see dominate world capitalism, world imperialism. So I'll leave it there, comrades.
Thank you, John. There's lots of issues in Matthew's opening contribution to examine. For example, the development of imperialism away from just simple military control to control over all aspects of society, the trade unions, the financial services, and so on. So it's worth discussing that. I just make one brief comment about Matthew mentioned about the language that Trump speaks. He's got an extremely limited vocabulary, which was like he's got good, bad, very bad, horrible, beautiful, and a few words like that. But with regard to Gaza, he said just in a press conference 2 days ago, there's very bad things happening in Gaza, which in terms of language limitation, that kind of captures it. It's up there with Descartes, I think, therefore I am. There's bad things happening in Gaza. If that's the limit of the insights, we're in big trouble. Anyway, Temos, you indicated you wanted to speak.
Yes, first, I think it's a brilliant observation, the new language of Trump. It has a lot to tell us about the man, about what's going on. It's just beautiful. I never thought about that, but I think that all is beautiful. I don't have much to quarrel with Matthew's presentation or what he described, because I think most of it is quite accurate in describing what is happening today in the world. Nevertheless, I feel that we should seek for some sort of explanation of why this is happening, some sort of basic essence that on which to base our analysis and predictions and our actual actions. Because unless we do that, we shall be left with just a picture that, however accurate it is, it won't help us much. I would go back to what Lenin tried to do in imperialism, in imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, where to oversimplify it and put it in a very simple concept is that what he said is that capitalism created monopolies. Monopolies create a lot of cash that they cannot reinvest in their own country, so they have to invest elsewhere. And there they clash with other imperialist countries, the monopolies of other imperialist countries, and we have war. I know it's a very oversimplification, but I think it's the essence of imperialism in Lenin's concept of the events at his time. And I think that we can still have that concept intact today, only on a much bigger scale. Now we only have the United States and a lot of subordinate imperialist countries. We have some new powers coming up, Russia, China, and this sort of thing, which they come up in the same way with monopolies again. So we have to describe, I think, imperialism in this basic economic concept and see the political consequences flowing from that, not directly, not linearly, but just on top of their economic aims. And in this sense, we have again this concept of the highest stage of capitalism, in the sense that they cannot go any further. They exhausted the possibilities even of a world in which just a few powers control the whole economy. I mean, if we see that the numbers, just a few hundred companies control what's happening in the world economy. By far the most of them are Americans, but we have Chinese, we have some Russian, not much there. And if we believe those who say that BRICS might form an alternative focal point of a multipolar world or a bipolar world, we can see that much before we reach that point, there will be war between them, because there is a direct clash. They cannot control this situation. And judging by the way by the speed with which wars proliferate these days, we're perilously close to that total war that we have been describing as a future possibility. So I would tend to try to see what's happening. I mean, there have been attempts to describe it. All sorts of names have been thrown around: post-capitalism, Varoufakis says techno-feudalism, and this sort of thing. But they don't capture the fact that we are not talking about a new system. The capitalism today is not the capitalism we knew, but it's not a new system. It's a mature and aging capitalism which cannot control what's happening anymore. And in this situation, I think we should find our way.
Thank you, Timos. The next speaker to indicate is Norma.
Thank you very much for this so very interesting, important contributions, all of you who speak before. I am not an expert in the just observations, and I mean what I can say also from the countries who suffered from imperialism. I think that it's not only US or is US the only imperialism? Is really in decay, a decay as or is just a transformation and evolution of what is in terms of economic imperialism, of economic globalization and transformation, in which, as has been said, I think very clearly, a concentration in which the inequality between the concentration of economy and more concentration and augmentation of richness in some companies or said even individuals, and the rest. And this can be seen in terms of different regions, different continents, and different hemispheres, north and south. And America is a continent which is spread out along the meridian, spread out very, very wide in the north, in the equator, and in the south. And the difference is incredible, is really shocking, the difference in developments, in inequalities. And why that? I mean, what are the reasons of the origin of this imperialism, of this transformation, as in of the different set eras or periods? And what I see that even without speaking about the richness, which is at the center of the basis, how much, as it has been put it out, how much cultural imperialism. I mean, even imperialism, we are talking about imperialism, but there are still many colonialism, and in regions, in countries, we can speak about cultural imperialism, but also cultural colonialism, and colonized, and that's just people are culturally colonized by themselves, even by themselves, I said, without being conscient of that, the penetration. And that, I think, is also a real problem. We need, because that is even, I mean, from our birth, which appear with our said 3-4 years in the child's. How Europe is there in this situation of being, I mean, Europe who have colonized, I mean, the colonization said, but now what is, I think Europe also, we can see there is no role, just following imperialism or just adhesions to the problem of wars, as I have said, which is at the basis of that. So I think it's not only US imperialism which we need to see today, but as has been also said, different interest in this capitalism, which is always there and is transforming, is with the same basis, but is not faced. At least there are no facing capitalism, imperialism. We do not see a real transition in this facing or alliance to face that. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma.
I'm sorry, I do not have propositions. I have just questions, but is what inspires me, these very interesting problems. I think this is a problem to really continues to.
No, that's a very valuable contribution, Norma, to the discussion. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
No. Nobody else indicating at this stage? There's a very wide range from the election of the socialist leadership to the trade unions, to culture, to music. The tentacles of imperialism spread across every aspect of human culture. And comrades will be aware of different experiences in different countries. Like I said, all the European powers, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany, France, the UK, Holland, all seized colonies across the globe and all had a hugely negative influence in the development of these countries. And it continues. So there's lots and lots of stuff to talk about. This is not very characteristic of WIN meetings. Reluctance to speak, especially with such a wide range of topics, even issues about division, racism, the traditional imperial policy, divide et impera, divide and rule, which came from Rome, was conducted throughout all the countries where the imperialists were influential. India, Pakistan, Ireland, creating divisions. Everywhere they went, they created divisions. Are you waving there, John?
Just thinking of imperialism spreading to music and that. Definitely looking at Donald Trump's visit to the Middle East. It was, what was the song? America Great Again and all that. And I think back to having Irish roots, that music was a very important strand in the struggle against imperialism. There was a whole raft of, if you like, Gaelic revival in terms of music. But thinking in terms of what happened in Greece, I think it was it The White Rose Will Bloom Again? Was a song that epitomised the struggle against the colonels when they ruled Greece. You know, a fairly innocuous song about a nice white rose blooming again. But that sort of summed up the fact that there was resistance. And if you like, the working class and the oppressed classes have always used music as a means of fighting imperialism. So I just sort of throw that into the ring.
Yeah, thank you, John. Dominic?
Yeah, it's just, I mean, Matthew's laid out this whole plan and he's showing to us all the power and all the weapons and mechanisms that imperialism has got to keep world order in place, and yet they're always failing. You know, they haven't got a system that can stop famine, stop pandemics, stop global warming, stop starvation, stop whatever you like. They're not in a situation where they want to do that. All they're concerned about is becoming wealthier and wealthier. I mean, the whole thing, the whole crisis that's now on us is that the capitalists, the billionaires and trillionaires or whatever heirs they are, have come to the conclusion that they're not rich enough and they've got to extract more and more out of the labour of the working class. And that in itself is going to cause a massive crisis. And that's the situation we're heading into, in my opinion. They're not capable of providing the resources that the working class need to have a decent life because they don't want to. It's not that the wealth isn't there, it's that they won't give up that portion of the wealth to the working class. I mean, it sounds crude, but I mean, it's the way I look at it. And I think the period we're entering into is going to be one of really massive, as I used to say, of sudden changes and what's its. So sharp turns and sudden changes. The whole sort of capitalist system seems to be spinning and going to spin out of control to me, and it's going to shake up the world as it does so. So I'll leave it there. It's a bit rambling, but there you go.
Thank you, Dominic. No, all the contributions comrades make are valuable in providing new insights into this extremely important topic. As I say, there was lots of material to work on here with a wide-ranging opening contribution. It looks like Matthew will coming back to you here to summarize the discussion. Just give comrades a chance again if they want to just simply ask questions or whatever. Jimmy.
Yeah, sorry, Phil, I can't get the caption thing to work anyway. I'm not going to say much, but I've got questions to ask. And they're fairly simple questions. Matthew did very well in sketching out a pyramid with the United States at the top. Now, the question that runs around my mind is, the United States is a country, it's a territory, it's a land inhabited, and it has different classes and it has different accumulations of the wealth within that country, including the labor wealth, all going back to the top of the pyramid. But the question that's running around my mind is, who really owns the pyramid? Who is the top? Who are the decision makers? And if we look at the influential people, we have the voice of the media, but then the voice of the media is generally a slave media reflecting either the ideas that they've been taught and they're there to control, to represent, or the immediate messages to get from the top to say. You have the financial strata, the likes of Wall Street. But does Wall Street on its own, which generally administers rather than creates money, it administers the distribution, it controls the value of it, and it controls the competition to it. But Wall Street on its own doesn't own America. You have the big companies, the auto companies, the General Motors, the Fords, all this. But again, they're working in a competitive market. They're in competition with each other, as not only internally, but externally in the world market. what they have shared, like for example, General Motors and its control of British motoring, of German motoring, of other European motoring, that are the legacy of the looting of World War II. You have the people in control of the national resources. You have the old families, the so-called people that would be reflected through organizations like the Heritage Council or the Heritage Foundation, an organization which dictates policy and very much, very clearly at the moment, has an influence on Trump and the people around him. But again, there doesn't seem to be one individual, one organization, one family, one layer, one strata pulling the strings. And the question I would have for Matthew is if he could define or indicate even who, through what organizations, through what layers, through what media, through what strings and strata, controls America in terms of deciding who are going to be its political representatives, who those representatives are going to directly represent, by which policies, by which decisions. The alternative is if there's nobody there, it means the situation is an unstable situation, that the competition within it can mean that at the end of the day, America cannot sustain its control, particularly with the rise of China and particularly with the financial and material developments through the Gulf, through the likes of Saudi Arabia and its areas, that the influence, the power, the control, the concentration of decision making is probably going to be a more scattered thing in the future. And again, that raises questions if there's not stable, conscious, controlled decision making coming out of America, if the challenges from abroad cannot be, even with the likes of Davos and these other organizations and venues, that we're in for a period where there will be tremendous opportunity for alternatives to be considered. And then that raises the question that the people that we'd be more interested in, the working class, nationally and internationally across the planet, there's an urgent need for the development of decision making to be transferred through the trade unions, through the political organizations of the working class. Now, I know that's a bit rambling, but nevertheless, there's ideas there that I'm tossing in my own head, and I hope somebody else can add some light and some influence onto them.
Thank you, Jimmy. Timos has indicated he wants to speak again, and he'll be followed then by Norma, who's also indicated. So, Timos.
Yes, I think the question that has been raised about by Jimmy Kelly is crucial. Who really rules the world today? Who rules America by who rules the world? And I think that it is quite certain that there is a shift away from what we knew before as the ruling classes, the bourgeoisie as the ruling class. That has been shrinking very quickly and very crucially in the last decades or so. I mean, the question about who controls the media. In a presentation that I made a few years back, there were in the 20th century something like 50 companies that controlled the whole of the mainstream media. In 2011, I think that the number shrank down to 6. So if we have 6 companies controlling this media, you cannot really see the world as being controlled by the bourgeoisie in general. It's just a very few monopolies and oligopolies that are the real rulers of the world, and everybody else is serving them. This puts a question of who is the ruling class. I think there was a brilliant article by Roger Silverman a few weeks ago, who said that it's just these few rich people that really rule the world. I think he's gone too far in naming that situation not capitalism but plutocracy, but he's making a valid point. We're talking about a new ruling class and a new layer of capitalists who are being displaced from the place of the ruling class. This has also parallel questions. In this case, what is the working class? How do you define that? And who are the potential allies of the working class in the clash, in the class struggle that is going to develop? Back in Marx's day, it was the petty bourgeoisie that they joined the working class program because they saw that they were falling down the capitalist pecking order. We have to discuss these things. I don't have answers, but certainly it's a crucial question that has to be answered. It has to be answered because it has important ramifications on what is our perspective, what do we do? And in all this gloom that very few people control everything, and that they control the media, they control the military, they control all these things. There is a silver lining as well. They are just too few. They will not be able to get real allies in society for long. They are not going to be. They are not going to be able to justify their existence forever. So there are a lot of possibilities of taking over these monopolies, and in this train, I think we shall again remember Lenin when he said that monopolies are a higher state of production. He didn't like the monopolists, but he realized that monopolies are something higher than normal competitive capitalism. The problem with these monopolies, it was not that they were monopolies, but that they were monopolies that cared for the profit of their owners and not for society. So taking over these monopolies should be the center point of our attention. These monopolies should be repurposed to serve society and not their owners, not the profits of their owners. I think we shouldn't look at these huge monopolies and say just destroy them. We shouldn't destroy them. We should take them over and take whatever vitality they have, whatever useful structures they have, and repurpose them to serve society. I think that's very important. We reached a point that we only have to do that for a few hundred companies. We don't have to go and take over every single factory out there. That's not the point. It doesn't matter whether there is a factory somewhere working on capitalist rules. The problem is that the Amazons and the Walmarts and the huge monopolies do that. The big pharma, the big energy companies. These are the important things. Everything else can continue for quite some time, a long time, to work the way it is working. We don't have to make huge changes, but it will be a huge change if we can take over these huge monopolies and repurpose them for the good of society.
Thank you, Timos. Next contribution is from Norma.
Yes, following on these different contributions and completing myself previous one. Conceptually, I think that after Matthew's presentation and all the contributions he inspired, I think I see more clear now. We need to identify not only one country or some countries, but really who had the concentration of powers. I mean, the concentration in these companies, in these monopolies, in these oligo or other, namely, who are the real power which we need to face, our working class and so on. Because if we see a United States, look at how different is the situation in this country to take this. I mean, there are really poverty and a big insight, really a big inequality, and namely, and if you look the country globally with respect to other countries in the same continent, you will see also this huge difference even more. And so we need now, I mean, I think it's necessary, it's not enough, it's not sufficient to see an US, to say US imperialism or another imperialism we can, but to really go into the few which or who concentrate the power we need to face, or working class or whatever, because is that, and also the contradiction between financial and production, because the global financial concentration, which do not give the face. Even we don't. I mean, there are the government. We said today that name in United States today is worse and so on. But before is not. It was not better with the other people or system. And so, or governments. Even the governments are the iceberg, but behind. If we look at Europe, behind the real power do not give the face. And so I think we need, and this is possible, identify, as I have said, corporation, companies, names, people who really concentrate and make the government of the world, said. Because, and I finish now, because even these international organizations, we said, you see, there are now US do not want to participate in such a kind of international, the usual international organization, but this international organization, which are their rules and so on. So you see the real, also we are in a real perhaps in a new era transformation, and then we need it's necessary to identify say what we need to face and to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma. Nobody else has indicated they wish to speak, so, oh, Dominic. Dominic?
Yeah, I'm just trying to unmute. Sorry about that. I just think that we've got to get things in perspective as far as it goes. I mean, the major lesson, as I understand it, out of the Paris Commune was that you can't leave the means of production in the hands of the capitalists, because that they will destroy the revolution. And we're talking now, I would say, that in the next 10 to 20 years, the working class will face a revolutionary situation. Whether it wins or not is dependent on the cohesion of the working class, on the leadership and the programs. But the programs are very, to my mind, are going to be generalized. We're talking about taking over the commanding heights of the economy. And on a world scale, that means international unity on the part of the working class to do that, as has been pointed out in previous discussions. You can't nationalize Amazon. You can't nationalize other companies like that. We're talking of international bodies that need to be combated by international working class organizations and cooperation. So I think that we should be talking in broad terms about the aims and objectives, not about which company or which this or which that, because I think the working class will decide that. We've got to make the point that you can't leave it in the hands of the capitalists, because they're the enemies of the working class, and it's got to be put in that sort of sense. And the working class, I would say, will take the rest of it if and when they can take power.
Thank you, Dominic. So, do you wish to make concluding summary points then, Matthew?
Yeah, there's a load of stuff in there. Thanks, comrades. I think I mean, in terms of the actual sort of how things confront the working class and the oppressed is, of course, actually, of course, the ruling class across the world, led by the US, and you have to say that the US is the leading power and does operate everything. I mean, obviously, with Trump trying to take the system apart on the basis of the US itself, trying to extract additional tribute, as it were, down to its own crisis. However, if you're, like in the likes of Sri Lanka or Argentina or whole swathe of other countries, I mean, you're facing demands from your own rulers, and then behind them the IMF, and behind the IMF you're facing the whole of imperialism. And you can see this also, of course, is that this is also the case in Gaza. I mean, the population of Gaza is not actually facing purely the IDF or the Israelis, actually facing the whole of imperialism. The whole of imperialism is trying to crush the population of Gaza. In those terms, and you can see, as I say, you see the whole question, say, auxiliary to that, position that the Yemenis are fighting the US Navy, which they've done successfully. They've actually succeeded in forcing the US Navy to stop. It's extraordinary. So in those terms, the ruling class itself operates on a global scale, and operates particularly, obviously, against the working class, which it consciously hates and fears. I mean, it's been obviously the importance of the Russian Revolution, of course, is to put the ruling class on notice. You can be disposed of, and the ruling class understands that. So in those terms, it creates that situation. I think the other thing to understand also is what you face a system in decline, that the function of capitalism itself was deeply damaged by the advent of the Russian Revolution and the concessions it had to make to the working class. It is continuing to decline in terms of its function. The function of raw value, being able to extract from the working class, being able to control the working class in the labour of the working class, becomes more and more difficult. And within that, of course, the position of the US itself of course, is also in decline. You know, you can see the decline of the US in terms of production, in terms of the move to financial parasitism, open parasitism. You know, which really creates these huge issues, which I mean Trump starts to in a cack-handed way point to, but under conditions in which he can do nothing about it. You know, obviously all he's going to do is make it worse for them. What that in terms of that position of finance capital, of course, is that increasingly what happens within finance capital becomes increasingly divorced from any production itself. So what you get is a situation where you load up all this stuff, you know, on the back of the productive system, and say, well, you know, you load up all these demands on it. And this is to say, I mean, if you take Warren Buffett, who's just retired at the age of 94, world's most successful capitalist. You know, he says, well, he described, say, for instance, the derivative system as a bomb under the system. It's, you know, it's a means of actually destroying the system, because what it's doing, of course, is to say, well, you know, we're actually going to extract the future now. So what you're saying is you're placing all this stuff under the system that will go off in the future, you know, in those terms. So I mean, the operation of the system becomes an issue. And as I say, the whole question is, I mean, the core of this actually is to say, well, you know, is to expropriate the banks, because actually what you're going to get now, I mean, the thing is that's really likely to go first is a financial, you know, usually the usual expression is a financial crisis. And of course they understand that, of course, I mean, the thing is it's far worse than it was in 2007-8, because they haven't resolved it in 2007-8. You know, and so in those terms, you've also got a situation in which the ruling class is so bad that actually the ruling class actually hoards cash. It actually, you know, actually removes its so much cash out of the system, and is so petrified by the working class, it refuses to invest. So it actually hoards cash. You know, there are trillions of dollars that are hoarded by the ruling class itself. You know, in those terms, and it shows you the degeneration of the system. And in terms of the point about naming the ruling class in the US, yeah, of course we can name the ruling class in the States. I mean, you can go through them. You know, it's a handful of people. It's Bezos, it's Ackman, it's, you know, Adelson, it's Larry Ellison, all these guys. You can make a list. Yeah. The point being, of course, is that, you know, it's now, as has also been made, I mean, the thing becomes increasingly concentrated. It's a tiny handful of people, and under conditions, okay, where, you know, clearly the ruling class was forced post-Russian Revolution to concede essentially bourgeois democracy of one kind or another, which of course is a contradictory thing, you know, because I mean, to a degree, bourgeois democracy is a concession to the population, you know, and also forms another mechanism of control. So it's in those terms deeply contradictory. But at the moment, you've got a situation in which, you know, such is the nature of the concentration of wealth, the tiny handfuls of people you're looking at, the crisis of the system, that of course the thing is moving very rapidly towards forms of dictatorship, and the removal, and we can see across the world, yeah, the removal of democratic rights, the effort to remove democratic rights from huge sections of the population, you know, of all sorts and types, precisely because the system cannot tolerate this anymore. So in those terms, yeah. I mean, you know, you can also see, I mean, in terms of the whole system, even like the bits of the system, like Israel. I mean, Israel's in terminal crisis. We should understand. I mean, I agree with Ilan Pappé when he says, you know, there's an end point here. It will actually not survive that much longer. But it is the cornerstone of the imperialist control of the Middle East. You know, so that's another question for them. I think the thing is that in terms of you know, as I say, also the issue of monopoly, that this you know obviously creates its own problems, and that they can't actually surmount them. what they really want to do, of course, is move towards war. And we can quite clearly see that in terms of Europe. Europe, much of Western Europe wants war with Russia. And much of and obviously the US is ultimately aiming for war against China. Now the problem they've got also is the populations are clearly not. If somebody say this is the issue, do you want to go to war? Most of the populations will say no, we don't want to go to war. And of course the other problem they've got is they're not very good at war anymore, as the Yemenis have quite clearly pointed out in recent times. They're just not very good at it. So the real issue becomes, well, okay, you want to go to war. The population doesn't want to go to war. So the only option you've then got is a nuclear war. That's the terrifying thing, is that actually, of course, these people are quite prepared to put, in order to try and put some crazy notion of putting an end to life on the planet in order to preserve their own system. It's bizarre and again, a bizarre and contradictory question, and then it becomes an issue for an issue of the working class. And the problem, then of course, as comrades have pointed out in some ways, becomes the question of the consciousness of the working class itself. How does the working class itself understand its own role in history? It's critical, that it is there in order to remove end class society itself. How much does the working class and then organise to do that? Because the working class, as Marx points out, working class does not actually become a class until it actually seizes power and abolishes all classes, including itself. Thanks.
Thank you, Matthew. I noticed, Norma, your hand is up. Is that from previous contribution? Norma, did you want to speak again? I see your hand.
Sorry?
Your hand is still up. You just left it there, did you?
Well, it's so vast. Just to perhaps clarify in my mind and what Matthew and previous Dominic also said. I do not have in mind, just to make, it's not the point to make a list of companies or the concentration, but to have in mind that there is a more important and more huge concentration in the evolution of the system, or capitalism, or imperialism, and we can, labelize the transformation. And this concentration is more and more huge, and inequalities are expanding too. If we take in global, mondial terms, and if we take by continents or by regions, that appears too. So we need to see how this is evolving and which can be the prediction for that. And at the same time, the working classes or the strugglers are the how can be organized internationally with all the different scales, because one thing is the world, another thing is a region, another thing is a country, another thing, etc. But having this in mind, I think we can develop the picture to understand better which is the future, the near future, how we can transform more, how we can be more, transform more, change what we see. That was trying to do for myself, of course, a synthesis of what we can, and there are the words, the words which appears, as you have all mentioned. And these international organizations are, we are facing a real transformation of what we have seen before. With same, I agree, with same characteristics and how the system is evolving, concentrating more power, concentrating more richness. And in this sense, I'm trying to say we need to identify, not just by names, but saying that inside this country, US, as Matthew presented so well, there are huge inequalities and huge concentrations, and one thing is financial, the banks, the companies, and in this, in conceptually, not in names, we need to put that explicitly. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Norma. I think, comrades, it's been an excellent discussion, very high level and very thoughtful contributions, which will cause us all to go away from this meeting and think afresh and bring new insights to bear in our understanding of this question of imperialism. And for that high level of discussion, I want to thank Matthew for his contributions and for all the other comrades who took part in the discussion. So thanks again to everybody who contributed. Our discussion next week is about India and Pakistan, the conflict that's developing over Kashmir. And we have two very important comrades from the region who are going to discuss that question. So, Pam, did you want to add anything about next week's meeting?
No, I just pasted the details into the chat, actually, if anybody wants to look quick before we end the meeting. But no, I mean, I've only got the information there that Roger's sent through, so that same time next week, yeah.
Yeah, there's an email gone out already with the content of the meeting. So, if
Well, it's only gone out to India and Pakistan. One will go out from us
Okay.
about Wednesday.
Okay. So, thanks again, comrades, for the contribution, and enjoy the rest of your reading. So.
Thank you very much.